So, my decrepit old computer can barely even handle editing these YouTube videos anymore, and definitely can't handle Elden Ring. So I've been playing it on my husband's computer while he's asleep, and while I watch over his shoulder through the day as he gets his FromSoft cherry burst, I've been looking for an older game that I can plug away at mindlessly and halfway pay attention to. I found out that YouTube has videos compiling short clips of every single game that exists on various consoles, so I fired up the NES video and started hitting the right arrow key until I found something cute and uncomplicated that almost looks like Zelda when you squint at it right. With a main girl easily mistakable for any other cute anime-style character used to market late 80s and early 90s Japanese games, the biggest surprise to me based on looking at this cover art is that this wasn't some untranslated Japan-only title that no one's ever heard of, but apparently was actually more heavily pushed in the US. The developer NMK made like 30 games from 1985 to 94 before shutting down, almost none of which I've ever even heard of, so I think it's about time some of these characters and properties got bought up and rebooted. Arkista's Ring, a NES game with no sequels, is actually a lot more straightforward than Zelda. I've seen it compared to Gauntlet, and I'd say that's more apt, though it's a bit slower and more methodical. It plays kind of like a run-and-gun shooter, but without much variety in shooting modes, and a decent number of circumstantially useful bomb-like power-ups that you collect and hopefully bust out consistently as you go. Stages mostly consist of fields and yards that lead up and into castles, and for a NES game there's a solid amount of environmental graphical variety between its 31 unique short stages. The purple checkerboard floor is especially stylish for an 8-bit stage. I'm not saying this is the most graphically advanced or visually highest effort game of 1990, but I am saying that the cute little elf girl sprite and the appealing UI elements on screen drew me to this game first out of everything in the NES library listed alphabetically, so at least it looked better to me than the 50 or so games I saw beforehand. If you're a completionist, you might not find this to be the most interesting trip from start to end, as technically victory comes when you've played through the 30 stages and final boss 4 times over, with the enemies getting a little tougher each time through. Now if you hear that and like me think, well fuck it, I'll just see if I can get to level 31, I don't need to technically beat the game, then you'll find Arkista's Ring is one of the most casually accessible NES games ever made, as it isn't especially challenging until the last few stages of each round, and even then the game is a lot less punishing than most other games on the console. You keep all of your power-ups when you die, and even when you game over, so the only thing that really resets when you game over is the enemies respawn, and even your health regenerates passively even though there's relatively frequent health potion pickups. You end up with a lot of health fairly early on after picking up all the pieces of armor, and you get 3 lives before you game over, as well as 10 continues before the game finally kicks you back to the title screen. I was personally able to make it cleanly to stage 61 on my first go, meaning that I'd basically already played through the whole game twice by the time I had to technically start over, and that took about 90 minutes. Christine the Elfin Archer is a fun avatar to control even if she walks a little slow because she fires her bow quite fast and can stop time to catch a breather while she selects which item to use, often turning the tide against hordes of enemies. By far the most difficult enemies are those who cross the screen quickly, especially the Ninja Clan members responsible for stealing the elfin ring that the whole game is dedicated to searching for. No, I'm dead serious. This game is actually about finding the elfin ring. It's like the Elden Ring, except it gets an F, or a V, depending on the translation. I don't think I've ever seen another elves versus ninjas story, even though it's a kind of obvious connection, what with all the mystical village woodsman imagery associated with both, which the Tales of games notably actually identified and sorta combined them. War of the Elves versus Ninjas maybe isn't a concept that needs fleshing out beyond the plot of a Nintendo game, but I'd be down for an updated take on the story. I think of Arkista's Ring as a sorely overlooked example of classic comfy gaming. While I appreciate the challenge offered by many older games, it can often be disheartening to have to practice for days just to make it through the earlier levels of games that you're not very good at to see more of what it has to offer. Once you've gotten invested in the game experience, you might start to feel that immersive sensation that drives you to keep going and conquer all of its challenges and play it again better and faster until you've satisfied yourself with expressing your understanding of the game's mechanisms, and I certainly know that for expert players of even the toughest games, a full playthrough can take so little time that it doesn't really register the same same way that that first lengthy, grueling attempt to just clear the thing does. But even a very casual fan of action-adventure games will get to have that breezy ride to completion with Arkista's Ring. A single playthrough of its 31 levels, which end with you killing a final boss and the castle collapsing, for me as a relatively unskilled player took about as long as it would take a speedrunner to blast through the first Zelda, which for me takes like 20 hours. And I would have to assume that an expert player of Arkista's Ring would only take just as long to get through all 124 levels. To me, the format of repeating the game 4 times reads as a way to make it simultaneously accessible to novice players, but also eventually somewhat challenging to more advanced players looking to test their endurance. I have to imagine that the biggest annoyance to those players would just be that eventually you'd rather start the game up from round 4 rather than having to go through all the other rounds to get to the meaningful challenge. But then I don't know if there are hardcore players of this game who are trying to beat it over and over again. Maybe this isn't the ideal arcade-style game for getting hardcore addicted to for days on end like what a lot of the games of its era seem to inspire, but it's easily one of the most throw-onable NES games that I've ever played. It's honestly less stressful even than Kirby's Adventure, up until each repetition of the last 2 levels when the difficulty spikes pretty hard. The fact that you can't quite hit enemies who are standing right on you, and that they really try to stand right on you, can make fighting a horde of ninjas a real pain in the ass. But by the time I died on a stage enough times that I could be called stuck, I'd gotten a pretty satisfying experience of basically seeing the game twice already, and I didn't leave it feeling even slightly burnt out on seeing or playing through its short levels afterward. Arkista's Ring's level design is just complex enough that it never feels mindless in spite of its simplicity, but it's also straightforward enough that blasting through it multiple times feels like it barely happened. I don't know who besides me basically needed a game exactly like this because they don't want to dedicate 20 whole hours to another classic action RPG light, but do want the soft satisfaction of whacking your way through monsters to an enemy castle collapse. Discovering gems like this is one of my favorite things about gaming, and as an incredibly picky person, it feels like a small miracle when I find a game that I actually like enough not just to blast through it, but to even see picking it up again and again and seeing how far I can get into it in the future. Especially when that game's older than I am and I'm just discovering it as an adult, totally without nostalgia, and with a real appreciation for the kind of relationship that you can develop with a game that you enjoy coming back to over the years. So if I ever make it to the true end of this game and I have something new to say about it, I'll definitely let you know. I've been Trixie the Golden Witch. You can find more of my writing on goldenwitch.substack.com and subscribe for bonus podcasts or get those by becoming a patron at patreon.com/goldenwitchfire. Subscribe to the channel for more videos on anime, classic games, and whatever else I like to talk about. All of my social media links are in the description, and never forget, anime forever.